Last month, my daughter-in-law confessed she'd emptied the college fund I'd built for my grandson. $47,000 spent on a new kitchen. She thought that was the only account. What she never discovered is that I'm a retired bank manager and I opened a second trust fund in my grandson's name that she can never touch. My name is Robert. For 35 years, I managed a bank and I built my career on one principle: trust is the only real currency. When my grandson Leo was born, I started two separate funds for his future. The first was a joint account, transparent and easy to access. The second was an irrevocable trust, a legal fortress only I could control. I did it to protect him, but I never imagined I'd need that protection from his own mother. My daughter-in-law's name is Elena. She married my son, David, 5 years ago. She's a talented interior designer, full of big ideas and even bigger ambitions for the kind of life she believes they deserve. And for a long time, I admired that drive. What I failed to recognize until it was too late was that her vision for their future was entirely funded by other people's patience. David works as a high school history teacher. He loves it, but the salary is what it is. Elena's business is feast or famine. They bought a modest fixer-upper in a nice neighborhood, a solid brick colonial built in the 60s. The plan, they told us, was to renovate it slowly, room by room, as they could afford it. A sensible plan. I offered to help with Leo's education instead, so they could focus on their mortgage. The day Leo was born, I went to my own bank, the one I'd retired from 2 years prior. I opened a standard joint savings account. I listed myself, David, and Elena all as co-owners. The logic was simple: transparency. They could see the deposits, watch it grow. I put in $5,000 to start. Every month, like clockwork, I transferred 500 more. For birthdays and holidays, instead of toys he'd outgrow, I'd add a lump sum. By Leo's third birthday, that account held just over $22,000. I showed them the statements. We talked about it at the dinner table. It was our family project. But in my desk drawer at home, I kept a second, separate file. In my 35 years in banking, I'd seen too many well-intentioned funds get repurposed. A market downturn, a medical emergency, a divorce, a sudden impulse for a boat. Life happens. And a joint account, by its very design, has no guardrails. Any owner can drain it for any reason. So the week after I opened that first account, I quietly engaged an estate attorney. We drafted an irrevocable educational trust. I named myself as the trustee. I funded it with another $5,000, and I set up automatic, smaller monthly contributions of $200 from a different pension check. The beneficiary was Leo. The terms were ironclad: distributions only for qualified educational expenses, tuition, books, room and board, upon submission of invoices to the trustee, not for a family vacation, not for a car, and most certainly not for a kitchen renovation. I never told them about the trust. In my mind, it wasn't a secret. It was a safeguard. It was the emergency parachute packed inside the plane. I assumed the joint account, growing visibly, would be the focus, and for years it was. The first sign of strain was subtle. About 2 years ago, Elena started talking about the kitchen. It was outdated, she said. The cabinets were falling apart. The layout was inefficient for entertaining. David would gently change the subject. Then 18 months ago, she presented a binder. It had fabric swatches, granite samples, floor plans from a contractor friend. The estimate was $40,000. David looked pale. He said they couldn't swing that. Elena said they couldn't afford not to do it, that an updated kitchen would add double that value to the house. They argued about loans, about credit cards. I stayed out of it. It was their house, their decision, but I felt a cold dread starting to form in my stomach. I began checking the balance of the joint savings account online a little more often. Then the conversation started to include me, not directly, but in that orbit that parents recognize. Elena would mention how lucky Leo was to have such a generous grandfather. She'd talk about the importance of a beautiful, functional home for a child's development. She'd sigh and say, if only we had a little help to get this project started, we could finally have the family home we've always dreamed of. David would sit there, silent. I was polite but firm. I told her my financial help was reserved for Leo's future, that the college fund was for his education, period. She smiled and said, of course, she understood completely, but the look in her eyes was different. It was calculating. The pressure increased. She sent me links to articles about how home equity is the best investment. She accidentally left a contractor's quote on my kitchen counter after Sunday dinner. The number was now $47,500. I said nothing. Last fall, the dynamic shifted. The polite hints stopped. Elena became distant, then resentful. She made comments about how some people hoard money while family struggles. She stopped bringing Leo over as often. David was caught in the middle, stressed and withdrawn. I knew a confrontation was coming. I just didn't know what form it would take. Then one Tuesday afternoon in March, she called me. Her voice was bright, artificially cheerful. She said she had wonderful news. They decided to move forward with the renovation. They'd found a way to make it work. She said, and I remember the exact phrasing, "We are so grateful for all your help, Robert, truly." I was confused. I said, "My help?" She laughed lightly. "The fund for Leo. We're using it as the down payment for the construction loan. It's perfect, really. We're investing in his home environment, which is just as important as his education." The room tilted. I kept my voice steady, a skill honed over decades of telling clients their loan applications were denied. "Elena," I said, "that money is not for a renovation. We've discussed this." Her tone cooled. "Robert, it's a joint account. We're on the account. It's our money too. We've decided this is the best use for it right now. Leo's only 4. College is a lifetime away." I told her it was a breach of trust. I told her to stop. She said, "It's already done." She hung up. My hands were shaking. I immediately logged into the online banking portal for the joint savings account. I refreshed the page. Then I refreshed it again, as if the numbers would change. The balance was zero. $47,128.16. Gone. A single transaction dated that morning. A transfer to an account I didn't recognize. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at that zero. The parachute, I thought. You packed the parachute. But here's what I hadn't fully prepared for: the nauseating feeling of watching the plane you built for someone you love get deliberately steered into the mountain. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was the annihilation of a shared promise. She saw a pile of money. I saw a bridge to my grandson's future, and she had just blown it up. I picked up the phone, but I didn't call David, and I didn't call Elena. I called my attorney, and I told him to pull the trust documents. The game had changed, and for the first time, she had no idea what the rules were. My attorney, Martin, confirmed it within the hour. The irrevocable trust was exactly that, irrevocable. Its assets were legally separate, untouchable by anyone but me as trustee, and only for Leo's education. "It's a fortress, Robert," he said. "She could hire a bulldozer and she wouldn't scratch the paint." That was my first piece of solid ground. Now I had to decide whether to reveal it or to let Elena believe she had won. I chose silence, not as a tactic, but because I needed to understand the full damage. I called David. He answered on the third ring, his voice thin with stress. I didn't yell. I asked one question. "David, did you authorize the withdrawal from Leo's college fund?" There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, then barely a whisper. "She said you," agreed Dad. "She told me last week you'd finally come around, that you said the house was an investment in his future too." My heart sank. He hadn't been a co-conspirator, he'd been duped. Elena had lied to both of us, creating a fiction where everyone was aligned. She isolated him to get to the money. I said, "I never agreed to that, not a word." She called me today to tell me it was already done. The sound he made was pure anguish. Oh God, $47,000. He wasn't calculating the loss of the money in that moment. He was calculating the loss of his wife's honesty, the collapse of the story he'd been living in. I told him to come over, alone. He arrived 30 minutes later, looking like he'd aged 10 years. We sat in my living room, the same room where we'd celebrated his engagement. He couldn't look at me. He just kept saying, I'm sorry, I should have checked with you, I should have seen." I stopped him. "This isn't your fault, David, but we have a problem, a massive one. That money is gone. The contractor probably already been paid a deposit. So I need you to tell me everything. What is the state of your finances?" What unfolded over the next hour was a portrait of a slow-motion financial unraveling. The renovation wasn't a luxury, it was a desperate gamble. Elena's business had hit a dry spell that had lasted over a year. They'd been supplementing their income with credit cards, then with a line of credit against the house. The monthly payments were drowning them. The kitchen renovation, in her mind, was a Hail Mary. A stunning, magazine-quality kitchen would let her attract high-end clients, she argued. It would pay for itself. It was their only way out. And the college fund, it was the only liquid asset they had access to that didn't come with a 25% interest rate. In her calculus, stealing from Leo's far-off future was the only way to save his present. She had framed it as a strategic relocation of family resources. David knew it was wrong. He argued against it. But the pressure, the collection calls, the maxed-out cards, Elena's rising panic had worn him down. When she presented the lie that I was on board, it was the excuse his conscience needed to capitulate. I listened, and the cold anger I felt towards Elena began to mix with something else, a terrible pity. They weren't villains, they were drowning people. And in her panic, Elena had grabbed the only life preserver she could see, even if it belonged to her son. But pity doesn't replace $47,000, and it doesn't rebuild trust. I made a decision. I would not reveal the existence of the second trust. Not yet. That information was my only leverage, my sole remaining asset in this disaster. Instead, I laid out a new reality for David. The money in that joint account was a gift, with a very specific intent, I said. Its misuse is a breach of our agreement. Legally, as a co-owner, what she did was permissible. Morally and ethically, it was theft. I want it back. David looked horrified. How? It's probably already in the contractor's account. We can't get it back. Then the renovation stops, I said. Today, you call the contractor and cancel. You eat whatever deposit loss there is. You take whatever penalty. And you use the remaining funds to pay down the most toxic debt you have. Then you and I will sit down and build a real budget, a real plan to refill that account, dollar for dollar, before Leo turns 10. It was a brutal, hardline offer. It meant admitting defeat to Elena, facing the contractor's wrath, and committing to years of strict financial austerity. David's shoulders slumped. He knew it was the only right path, but he also knew it was a path that led straight through a war with his wife. He went home that night armed with my ultimatum. I didn't hear from him for 24 hours. Then, late the next evening, my doorbell rang. It was Elena. She didn't look triumphant anymore. She looked furious, cornered. She stood on my porch without being invited in. "How dare you," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you go behind my back and turn my husband against me? That money saved our family." I remained in the doorway. "It was never your money to save your family with, Elena. It was Leo." "He is my family," she shot back. "Everything I do is for my family. You sit in this big, empty house with your piles of money and your judgment, and you have no idea what real pressure is." We were sinking. "And now you've handed your son's future to the water to keep yourself afloat for another few months," I said, my voice calm. It was the calm that made her angrier. "The renovation stops. You will return what funds you can. This is non-negotiable." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Non-negotiable? It's done, Robert. The cabinets are ordered. The demolition starts Monday. There is no returning the funds. You lost. All you can do now is get on board and be happy your grandson will have a beautiful kitchen to grow up in." This was the impasse. She saw the spent money as a fait accompli, a new reality I simply had to accept. I realized then that reason was useless. She had justified this to herself so completely that any opposing view was an attack on her very survival. So I changed tactics. I gave her a single hard fact. "Elena, you have taken $47,000 that did not belong to you. That is a fact. I am now exploring every legal and financial avenue available to me to recover those funds or seek restitution. You may want to consult your own attorney." Her eyes widened. The word attorney cut through her fury like a slap. You would sue us, your own son." "I would seek to make my grandson whole," I said. "How I have to do that is now a question for you to answer." I closed the door. The siege began in earnest. Elena unleashed a campaign of emotional warfare. She called me a miser, a monster who valued money over his family's well-being. She sent long, manipulative texts about how Leah would suffer in a broken home if they had to declare bankruptcy. She enlisted her own parents to call me to plead for compassion. David became a ghost, caught in the crossfire, communicating only in terse, apologetic fragments. I documented everything, every text, every voicemail, the date and time of her porch confrontation. I opened a fresh notebook, just as the Frank from the original story had done. I wrote down the balance of the trust fund, which now held a little over $18,000. I wrote down my ultimatum. I wrote down her refusal. After 2 weeks of stalemate, I made my first move. I had Martin draft a formal letter. It was not a lawsuit. It was a demand letter. It outlined the purpose of the joint savings account, cited the evidence of our conversations about its educational use, and stated that the unauthorized withdrawal constituted a breach of our fiduciary understanding. It demanded the return of the full amount within 30 days, or we would be forced to pursue all available legal remedies, including a civil suit for conversion. We sent it certified mail to their home. This was no longer a family argument. It was a legal dispute. The reaction was volcanic. Elena called Martin's office, screaming at his paralegal. She left me a voicemail so venomous it was shocking. In it, she said something that changed the game entirely. She said, "You think you're so smart with your legal threats? Fine, two can play that game. You want to talk about what's best for Leo? A judge will decide. And when they see how you're trying to bankrupt his parents, they'll give me control of everything else you've ever set aside for him. You just wait." A cold clarity washed over me. She wasn't just defiant. She was planning a counterattack. She was going to go to court, not to defend her actions, but to attack my fitness as a grandparent and financial steward. She was going to try and seize control of the only thing I had left, the secret trust. The plane wasn't just crashed. She was now coming for the parachute, claiming it was hers all along. Elena made good on her threat. 10 days after her voicemail, I was served. The papers weren't in response to my demand letter. They were a preemptive strike. She and David, listed as co-petitioners, were petitioning the court for the removal of me as trustee of any and all funds established for the benefit of their minor child, Leo. The grounds: gross mismanagement and hostile alienation of assets. She had somehow discovered the existence of the trust. My hands went numb holding the papers. David's name was on them. That was the second blow. I called Martin, my voice tighter than I intended. How did she find out? And how is David's name on this? Martin was quiet for a moment. The petition mentions a previously undisclosed account, discovered during a review of family financial records. She must have gone digging through your son's files, maybe found an old statement you'd left in a drawer, or pressured him until he remembered you mentioning a backup plan years ago. As for his name being on it, he's the child's parent. A judge would expect both parents to be parties to such a request. His attorney may have advised it's procedurally necessary, even if he's not the driving force. I hung up and called David. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. The betrayal was now a physical document with his signature somewhere on a line I couldn't see. The legal gears began to turn, slow and grinding. My demand letter was now a minor skirmish in a larger war. The core question before the court was no longer about the $47,000 she took. It was about the $18,000 I had protected. She was arguing that I, by hiding assets and refusing to release funds for the immediate welfare of the child and his family, was the one harming Leo. Her narrative was brilliant and sinister. The greedy grandfather hoarding money while his family floundered, using financial control to punish and alienate. We had no choice but to respond in full. Martin filed our answer, denying all allegations and laying out the true sequence of events: the establishment of the transparent joint fund, its unilateral looting, the existence of the protective trust as a standard, prudent financial tool. He attached every piece of documentation from my notebook. The court date was set for 8 weeks out. Those 2 months were a cold desert. Communication with David and Elena ceased entirely, mediated through attorneys. The silence from my son was the worst part. I heard through my sister that Elena was telling family members I was trying to bankrupt them and take Leo away. The narrative was spreading, and I was becoming the villain in my own story. I met with Martin weekly. We went over every possible question. I rehearsed explaining why an irrevocable trust was not hiding money, but allocating it for a specific, protected purpose. I prepared statements on the difference between a gift for education and a license to pay down credit card debt. I was building a case, but I was also steeling myself for the possibility of loss. A family court judge, faced with a struggling young family and an apparently inflexible grandfather with a secret account, might very well decide to rebalance things in the child's best interest. They could remove me as trustee and appoint a neutral party, or even Elena herself. The fortress could be stormed not by force, but by a court order. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I went to my home office and took the trust document out of the safe. I read the terms I had written for the exclusive benefit of the beneficiary's post-secondary education. It was so clear, so simple. I thought of Leo, now 5, oblivious to the legal war being fought over his future. I had wanted to build him a bridge. Instead, I'd built a courtroom. The hearing was in a modern county courthouse, all pale wood and fluorescent lights. It felt nothing like the imposing marble hall of Frank's story. This was bureaucracy, not gravitas. Elena and David arrived with their attorney, a young woman in a sharp suit. David looked at the floor as they walked in. He didn't look at me. Elena, however, did. She met my gaze across the aisle and held it. There was no anger left in her expression, just a flat, determined certainty. She believed she was right. That was the most frightening thing. The judge was a man in his 50s, Judge Howard, with a reputation for being no-nonsense and impatient with family drama. He skimmed the file, looked at both tables and said, "Let's try to be efficient. This is a petition to remove a trustee. Petitioner's counsel, begin." Elena's attorney stood. She was polished. She spoke of parental rights, of the primacy of the nuclear family in financial decision-making for a child. She painted me as an overreaching patriarch, using a secret trust to wield influence and punish my son's family for their financial struggles. She presented the drained joint account as evidence of their dire need. She argued that the trust assets should be released to the parents' control to stabilize the home environment, which was the true educational foundation for a child. She was good. She made it sound so reasonable. Then it was Martin's turn. He was older, slower, but his voice carried a weight of experience. He didn't argue emotion. He argued law and intent. He submitted the trust document into evidence. He walked the judge through the timeline using my notebook as a guide. The initial gifts, the discussions about college, the sudden renovation plans, the demand letter, the retaliatory petition. He presented it as a straightforward case of someone trying to bypass irrevocable terms after misusing freely available funds. Then he did something I didn't expect. He called me to the stand. I took the oath and sat down. Martin's questions were gentle but precise. He had me explain my career, my understanding of financial instruments. He asked why I created 2 accounts. I looked at the judge. I created the joint account to be transparent, to involve them. I created the trust because, in my professional experience, life is unpredictable. The trust wasn't a secret from my grandson, it was a shield for him. I never imagined the threat would come from inside his own home. Elena's attorney objected, non-responsive and speculative. Judge Howard overruled. "I'll allow it. Go on, Mr. Carter." Martin then asked the pivotal question. "Upon learning the joint account had been emptied, did you consider simply giving your daughter-in-law the funds from the trust to resolve the family conflict?" I answered truthfully. For about 5 minutes I did. Then I realized that would be rewarding the exact behavior I was trying to protect my grandson from. It would teach him that if you want something, you take it first and justify it later. My job as trustee isn't to keep peace, it's to keep a promise. Then came cross-examination. Elena's attorney approached. "Mr. Carter, this shield you speak of, isn't it true that it has effectively shielded these funds from being used to prevent foreclosure on your grandson's home?" "I have no knowledge of any foreclosure proceedings," I said. "But you are aware of their significant financial distress. I became aware after the money was taken, yes. And yet, even then, holding this $18,000 cushion, you chose to sue them rather than help them. Is that accurate? I took a breath. I chose to seek restitution for my grandson's stolen college fund. I did not choose to give them a second, unprotected sum of money to solve problems caused by the misuse of the first. She pressed on, trying to paint me as cruel and rigid. I held my ground, referring back to the trust's purpose. The judge watched, his expression unreadable. Then she asked her final question. Mr. Carter, if you are so concerned about your grandson's future, why didn't you just give the money directly to him? Why this complex legal mechanism? I looked over at David. He was staring at his hands. I said, because he's 5, and when you're 5, you need adults to protect your future from other adults. The hearing concluded shortly after. Judge Howard said he would take the matter under advisement and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. No dramatic victory or defeat from the bench, just more waiting. As we were gathering our papers, Elena walked past me. She stopped and said very quietly, "You've destroyed us. I hope your money keeps you warm at night." David lingered for a moment after she left the room. He finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. "She found the statement in a box of my old tax files," he said, his voice ragged. "Her lawyer said if I didn't join the petition, it would look like I agreed with you hiding assets from our son, that it would hurt our case. I didn't know what else to do." It was the first time I'd heard his voice in months. He wasn't explaining, he was confessing. I just nodded. There was nothing left to say. The 2 weeks that followed were a strange limbo. The legal battle was in the judge's hands. The family bridge was burned. All I could do was wait. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Martin called. "The ruling is in, I have it. Can you come to the office?" His tone gave nothing away. I drove downtown, my stomach in knots. I sat across from his desk. He didn't smile or frown. He just slid the document toward me. "Read it," he said. I skimmed, my heart pounding. Then I found the core of it. Judge Howard had denied the petition to remove me as trustee. In clear, unambiguous language, he upheld the terms of the irrevocable trust. He found that the petitioners had not met the high burden of proving mismanagement or hostility. He noted that the existence of a protective trust was a legitimate estate planning tool, not evidence of alienation. But then came the next paragraph, the one that changed everything. While denying their primary request, the judge made a secondary ruling. He cited the principle of in loco parentis and the court's overarching authority to act in the best interest of a minor. He found that while the trust's educational purpose was valid, the current, acute financial instability of the child's primary home constituted a legitimate threat to his welfare. Therefore, he ordered a one-time, limited distribution from the trust assets. Not to Elena, not to David, but to a court-appointed financial guardian who would use the funds to pay, directly and solely, the overdue mortgage payments and municipal utilities on the family home for a period of 6 months. This was to provide a bridge to stability. After this distribution, the trust would resume its normal, protected status, with me remaining as trustee. The amount was just over $12,000. I looked up at Martin. He's taking money from the trust to pay their bills. Martin nodded, his face grim. He's splitting the baby, Robert. He's upholding your legal right to be trustee, but he's also using the trust's assets to address what he sees as a crisis for the child. It's a compromise, but from the bench, you don't have a choice. The victory was ash in my mouth. The fortress had held, but the judge had reached inside and taken a ransom to pay off the invaders. Elena's narrative, that the money should be used for the family's immediate needs, had been partially validated by the highest authority in the room. My shield had been used to pay for the very problem it was meant to be shielded from. I had won the legal battle, but at a cost that felt like a profound, hollowing defeat. The principle was broken. The trust was no longer irrevocable in practice, only on paper. I walked out of Martin's office into the bright afternoon. The legal war was over, but the real cost, the cost to my family, to my relationship with my son, and to the very idea I had sought to protect, was just beginning to come due. I had gone to court to defend a future for my grandson, and the court had decided that his present was so broken it had the right to mortgage that future to fix it. The court's ruling felt like a surgery that had saved the patient but left a permanent, disfiguring scar. I was still the trustee, but the trust was no longer inviolate. $12,000 was transferred out, paid directly to the bank and the utility company. The immediate crisis in David's home was averted, but the cost was a poison in the well of our family. For months, we existed in a state of exhausted ceasefire. I didn't hear from David or Elena. The silence was absolute. I learned from mutual acquaintances that the renovation had been scaled back dramatically, just the essential repairs, no luxury finishes. Elena's business remained stagnant. They were treading water, but they were no longer sinking. The court-ordered bridge had given them 6 months of breathing room. What they did with that room was up to them. I focused on the trust. The balance was now just under $6,000. I continued my monthly contributions, but the act felt different. It was no longer about building a future. It was about restoring what had been breached. I was a banker repairing a vault after a robbery, knowing the combination had been forced. Then in the late spring, my doorbell rang on a Saturday morning. It was David. He was alone. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in years. He held a manila envelope. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat in the living room. He didn't make small talk. He placed the envelope on the coffee table. "I've filed for divorce," he said. His voice was quiet, firm, devoid of drama. The air left the room. This was the last thing I expected. After all the fighting to save their family, he was ending it. I asked why. "The court case was the end," he said. "Not because of the money, because of the lie. She lied to me to get to that joint account. She manipulated me into joining that petition. I lived with someone who saw our family, our son, and even me as instruments to get what she wanted. And after the ruling, she wasn't grateful for the help. She was furious she didn't get full control. She said I was weak for not fighting harder. I realized I wasn't married to a partner. I was married to a crisis, and I was just another resource to be consumed." He opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of paper, a financial plan, a budget, a debt repayment schedule. He had gotten a second job tutoring in the evenings. He had sold his car and bought a cheaper one. He had met with a credit counselor. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "I'm here to show you what I'm doing. I am going to pay back every cent that was taken from Leo's joint fund. It will take me years, but I will do it. And I need you to know that I will never, ever violate your trust or his again." I looked at the spreadsheets, the numbers in neat columns. This was the son I had raised, the one who, when he finally saw the truth, didn't look away, the one who took responsibility. The weight I had carried for months began to crack. "Where is Leo in all this?" I asked. "With me," David said. "We have shared custody. Elena and I are civil. She's focused on her business. I'm focused on providing a stable, honest home for my son. It's not the family I pictured, but it's the one we have." He visited again the next week and brought Leo. My grandson, now 6, ran into my arms as if no time had passed. He talked about kindergarten, about soccer, about the dinosaur book he was reading. The world of lawsuits and trusts and kitchen cabinets didn't exist for him. That was the greatest relief of my life. David and I began to rebuild slowly, painfully. We didn't talk much about the past. We talked about the future. He asked me to teach him about budgeting, about investing. We looked at the trust statements together. I explained, in simple terms, what it was for. He listened. He learned. A year after the divorce was finalized, David received a promotion at school to department head. It came with a modest raise. The first thing he did was write a check for $1,000. He made it out to the irrevocable trust. "It's a start," he said. I deposited it. The gesture meant more than the amount. It was a covenant. Elena moved to a neighboring city. Her business eventually found firmer footing. Our interactions are limited to polite exchanges at school events. The war is over. We are 2 separate countries with a shared border in a small boy. The final surprise came just last month. I was reviewing the trust's annual statement. The balance had grown steadily, back up to a healthy figure. At the bottom of the statement, in the notes section, I saw a line I had to read twice. It was a beneficiary designation update filed by the corporate trustee who handled the investments. It listed a successor trustee. Upon my death, or if I became incapacitated, the successor trustee would not be David. It would be David and one other person jointly. The other person named was my grandson, Leo. But not Leo as a minor. The designation specified that upon reaching the age of 25, Leo would assume the role of co-trustee alongside his father. I had never authorized this. I called the trust company. After a review, they confirmed the change had been requested and properly documented over a year ago. The request had been made by David. I called him confused. David, why did you add Leo as a future trustee, and why at 25? He was quiet for a moment. Because I never want him to be in the dark about what's his, he said, and I never want him to feel like it's a secret or a weapon. I want him to learn what it means to be a steward, to understand the responsibility before he gets the benefit. You taught me that, even though I learned it the hard way. I want him to learn it from us directly. 25 is old enough to understand, but young enough to still need guidance. I want us to guide him together. I hung up the phone and sat in my quiet study. The second account, the secret fortress, was no longer a secret. Its walls were still strong, but its gate now had a future keyholder. The money was protected, but more importantly, the principal had been restored and extended. It wasn't just a fund for Leo's education anymore. It had become a lesson in integrity, passed from me to my son to my grandson. The journey that began with a betrayal and a hidden safeguard ended with a transparency I could never have planned. I had built a vault to protect a boy from the world, and in the end, the boy's father had built a window into the vault so his son could see inside and understand what was being protected and why. The foundation, tested to its absolute limit, had held not just the financial one, the familial one. It was scarred, it was repaired, and it was stronger in the broken places. I looked at the statement again, at the two names listed as future stewards of a promise, my son and his son. The past and the future linked by a thread of hard-won trust. And I realized that was the final, surprising payoff. The second account was never the real secret. The real secret was that love, when it's real, doesn't just give you a gift. It gives you the tools to protect it and the wisdom to know when to pass those tools on. So what is the real currency in a family? It's not the dollars in an account, secret or otherwise. It's the trust. And trust, I learned the hardest way possible, is the one asset you can't simply gift. It has to be built, transaction by transaction, over a lifetime, and one withdrawal of deceit can bankrupt it faster than any market crash. For 35 years, I thought my job was to move money. It turned out my real job was to be a custodian of promises. A promise to my late wife to be a good grandfather. A promise to my grandson to look beyond the horizon he couldn't yet see. And yes, a promise to myself to not let sentimentality destroy the very things sentiment was meant to preserve. We build structures. For bridges, it's steel and concrete. For families, it's boundaries and words and sometimes uncomfortable legal documents. We do it not to keep people out, but to keep the center strong. To define what is sacred so everything else can be flexible. When you refuse to defend that center, you don't save the family. You just teach everyone that nothing is worth defending. My story is not a blueprint. It's a cautionary tale. It asks a question I think every parent and grandparent needs to answer. Are you giving your children a resource, or are you building their character? A resource can be spent, mismanaged, taken. Character is what decides whether they'll be the ones doing the taking or the ones rebuilding what was broken. Maybe you're facing a similar test right now, a family member pressing against a boundary, a financial decision dressed up as an emergency, that feeling in your gut telling you something is wrong, even as someone you love tells you it's right. Listen to that feeling, document it, seek counsel. Saying no is not a failure of love. It is often love's most definitive and most difficult action. The second account was my safety net, but the real safety net was the principle behind it, that some promises are meant to outlast our moods, our crises, and even our mistakes. That principle survived the courtroom. It survived the silence. And it's being passed on now in a new form to a boy who will one day be a man holding the keys to his own future. I'm Robert. I'm a retired bank manager, a grandfather, and now a witness to the fact that even the most carefully laid plans can go awry. But I'm also proof that when you stand on the foundation of a real promise, even when the ground shakes, you don't fall. If you found this story worth your time, if it made you think about the structures in your own life, then consider subscribing. This channel is dedicated to real stories of conflict, principle, and the quiet battles that define who we are. Your subscription tells the algorithm that these narratives matter. It helps bring more of them to light. Because somewhere out there, someone else is staring at a zeroed-out balance or a demand they know is wrong, wondering if they're alone. They're not. And neither are you. Thanks for listening.